The mental organism designed only for killing, aka M.O.D.O.K, has a crazy ability and an even crazier look. When combined with Morbius, he can put a ton of points on the board. Hi, I'm Rich Slayton, and this is my version of the Momo combo that I think is really great for pushing through the mid-tier of ranks, that 30 rank to 80 rank, when you're not facing those big-time infinite push decks. In this video, we're going to start off by going through the cards that make this deck up. Then we'll go ahead, talk strategy, and then finally, the swaps, what cards you might move in and out because this deck is very Series 3 heavy. With that said, let's get into it. Okay, so the two core cards of this deck, very clearly, very obviously, M.O.D.O.K, who discards your entire hand, and then of course his pal Morbius, who gets +2 power for every card you discard. These are the core cards of the deck, and a lot of the cards that surround these two cards are designed to feed your Morbius. And in particular, we're going to talk about a few cards that combo. Colleen Wing, which helps discard your lowest cost card, which should always be used if possible to target your swarm, which of course then will give you more swarms that you can then go discard later with M.O.D.O.K to double up, triple up, quadruple up on those points. Another one for feeding is Wong, who can help you combo into a double M.O.D.O.K, and especially when you start comboing with swarms who are discarded by callings, and then you Wong, and then M.O.D.O.K, and it goes churn, churn, churn. Next thing you know, big time Morbius. Those are the core cards here, and then the other cards that surround and help out have very specific roles. So we've already talked about your first 2 cost cards. At the 3 cost card, or the 3 part of your curve, you have 2 cards you're actually rarely ever going to play. One of them is designed not to be played, and that's Blackcat, who will discard to feed your Morbius more often than not, but who's a great play on turn 3 option if you don't have certain cards or good options to play at that moment, and at 7 power, she can be pretty helpful. Wave is your other 3 cost card for that curve, that part of the curve, and she's great for if you don't have good options yet, she can set up ways for you to get points on the board. Hey, I don't see M.O.D.O.K in my hand, I don't see Morbius in my hand, but I can get a 10 power Helicarrier on the board by turn 4. Great, let's go ahead and do it. At your 4 curve, you have the primary card, which is Wong, who's designed to double the on-reveal ability, and then of course combo into your M.O.D.O.K play on turn 5. But you also have Jubilee, who we'll talk about her strategy in a minute, but who really is your in case of emergency break glass card. Her primary purpose is to help you get Morbius or M.O.D.O.K onto the board if you haven't been able to do so already. If you're on turn 4 or turn 5 or even turn 6 and you don't have one of those 2 cards in play, haven't got them triggered yet, she can help save you in those situations. Finally, you go past turn 5 and into turn 6, and you have 4 cards, only one of which you're ever really likely to play, and that's your Apocalypse, who most likely is going to be your play on turn 6, assuming you got him into your hand early enough to get benefits of the M.O.D.O.K discard. If not, if one of these other cards is in your hand on turn 6, either because you didn't play M.O.D.O.K or because you drew them after M.O.D.O.K, you have some fun options here with Arnim Zola, who could split your Morbius into multiple different lanes, or split your M.O.D.O.K if your M.O.D.O.K is solo laned. Just do some weird stuff for you. You have your Odin, who can go and re-trigger M.O.D.O.K, who can go and re-trigger Colleen Wing, who can go and re-trigger your Jubilee and get more cards drawn onto the board. And then you just have a 10 cost splash here with Helicarrier. These are the cards, these are their purposes. Now that we understand what the core of the deck is, let's talk strategy. The whole idea behind this deck, the core of it, is get Morbius on the board and then pump Morbius up like crazy and then win other lanes. So your ideal line is based on that. Turn 1, you're going to play nothing. Turn 2, you're going to play Morbius. Turn 3, in an ideal world, you play Colleen Wing in order to discard swarms, and typically you're going to play Colleen in a lane that's not the same as your Morbius. Your hope is that Morbius can carry a lane all by his lonesome. Then on turn 4, we want to play Wong, and then on turn 5, M.O.D.O.K behind Wong. And if all has gone according to plan, when you play M.O.D.O.K behind Wong, you'll have your Apocalypse in your hand, you'll have a bunch of swarms in your hand, and you'll have the Helicarrier in your hand, and you'll double proc M.O.D.O.K, throw a ton of points behind Morbius, now have a great lane where you have Colleen plus Wong plus M.O.D.O.K all in the same lane potentially, and then you have a massive turn 6 where you can drop a juiced up Apocalypse, a really mean looking Apocalypse, alongside a whole bunch of swarms and take over the board. That's your ideal line for this deck. Of course, that ideal line doesn't always happen, so here are some important rules that can kind of help you guide and some contingency plans that you're going to go through. First of all, you never have a turn 1. You never have to worry about turn 1. Turn 2, if you have Morbius, always play him on turn 2, get him on the board. If you don't, you typically don't want to play Colleen Wing unless you have Swarm in hand. So your turn 2 plays are either Morbius or Colleen Wing. Don't play Swarm on its own. You'll kind of undercut the whole concept of the deck. Are there cases where you might? Maybe, but in general, you can still win by skipping turn 1 and turn 2 on here. The interesting thing about turn 3 in this deck is your ideal turn 3 play is actually Colleen Wing. Ideally, you've played Morbius on turn 2, and you play Colleen on turn 3. And that's what's great about Blackcat, is Blackcat's a card you don't have to play to get value from. She discards herself if not played, and then feeds your Morbius. But if you haven't been able to make those 2 plays, or you only made one of them, you don't have another option, Blackcat, if you get her, if you pull her on turn 3, usually go ahead and play her, unless you have some other compelling option. Otherwise, you can play Wave, unless you're up against a Death Wave deck. Don't play Wave against Death Wave decks. You're just giving them a card that they may not have pulled yet. So once you start seeing Destroy cards, once you start seeing like all the different pieces, you see Carnage, you see Bucky Barnes, you start seeing the cards that build a Death Wave deck. Don't play Wave on turn 3. Don't play Wave at all. Make them play their Wave to get that benefit. So then you play on turn 3. Maybe you skip on turn 3. So hopefully within turn 3 you've played these 2 cards. And if you haven't, you've played some combination of them with either Blackcat or Wave on turn 3. Now we get into turn 4. If you can, you get Wong down. And if not, you want to take a look at what's in your hand at the moment. Do you already have M.O.D.O.K? Do you already have Morbius? Are they already either on the board or in your hand at the moment? If not, you kind of get this kind of can be an iffy decision at this point. I might even play Wave on turn 4 if I have one of them but not the other, because I don't want to drop it. Don't want to drop the other one quite yet. But you can play Jubilee on turn 4 to try to pull one of them on the board. You don't want to pull M.O.D.O.K unless you have things like Swarm in your hand, Helicarrier in your hand, Apocalypse in your hand. So if you don't have the cards in your hand that you need, playing Jubilee early on turn 4 can be a detriment rather than a win. If you do have M.O.D.O.K in hand, if you do have Morbius on the board, go ahead and play Jubilee and pull one of these other cards onto the board. Maybe you pull Wong and you didn't have Wong yet. Maybe you get a big Helicarrier on the board. Maybe you play Jubilee and you pull Odin behind it, and then Jubilee gets to activate her ability again. Right? So lots of cool things you can do with her there on that turn. The big question now is M.O.D.O.K. M.O.D.O.K really needs to be played on turn 5 to be effective at its highest peak, right? Because turn 5 M.O.D.O.K, in the ideal world, sets up a turn 6 Apocalypse plus Swarm drop. But there are situations where you might not want to play M.O.D.O.K on that turn. For example, you still have Morbius in your hand because you drew him on turn 5. That can be a dangerous situation for trying to play Morbius. If not, if you don't have Morbius yet, on turn 5, maybe you play Jubilee there to try to get Morbius on the board. But M.O.D.O.K mostly plays on turn 5, occasionally on turn 6, if there's something in your hand you don't want to destroy. Do not worry about destroying any of these six cost cards. All of those can be trashed. None of them are critical, and destroying Apocalypse isn't a problem. But you do want to worry about destroying the cards like your Morbius and playing M.O.D.O.K when you don't have Swarm in hand. These are the places where you get into more trouble. So that's the basic idea of the strategy here. It's pretty straightforward most of the time. You might have some other lines you play here or there, but you basically have this very simple idea. Get Morbius on the board, discard a ton of stuff, try to win 2 lanes, and then if you do get the full ideal, then you can go ahead and slam 3 lanes and have a whole lot of fun. All right, now let's talk about swaps, because there are 6 cards that are not automatic cards. 6 cards that are Series 3 and above. One of them, of course, being M.O.D.O.K. Sorry, you have to have him to have this deck. He's in the past for the season, which is almost over, so maybe if you haven't got him yet, go ahead and get him. You can't replace M.O.D.O.K. When we talk about the other cards, from a priority standpoint, when you're looking at the other cards here, you have Colleen Wing, Blackcat, Wong, Arnim, Zola, and Helicarrier. Colleen Wing and Wong are the two most important cards of the Series 3 cards to have for this deck. Colleen is the most difficult one to replace, because Colleen Wing, her whole point is to target Swarm early and help you get more Swarms in hand to both juice your Morbius and play turn 6 for extra value. She's really hard to replace, and I really would not tell you to replace her with Blade. The thing about Blade as a replacement for Colleen Wing is that Blade discards anything, which means that if you have Morbius in your hand or M.O.D.O.K in your hand, you're running the risk of essentially ruining your entire line of play. So I really don't recommend Blade as a replacement here, and if so, you're going to find yourself hamstrung on certain occasions. You just got to be careful or be willing to gamble because you don't have Colleen Wing yet. Colleen's probably one of the two, she's definitely one of the two, maybe the most important, if you don't have her yet, card to get from the shop. The second one that you really want to have here is Wong. Wong is really valuable because of that double play that you get with M.O.D.O.K. That double play behind Wong gives you, hey, not only takes your Apocalypse from 8 to 12 to 16 power, not only discards multiple swarms, right? Giving you, now you went, hey, I had one swarm, now I have 2, now I have 4, or now I have 5 or 6 if you've already done it with Colleen, which then juices up Morbius and gives you a turn 6 play. But also that double play with Helicarrier. And Helicarrier is basically in here because when it's discarded, it gives you 3 more cards. So you do that Wong to M.O.D.O.K double play, you actually get 4 total discards out of that rather than just 1, which is the really big value there. If you are going to replace Wong, the cards I replace Wong with, I'm going to replace on curve. I mean, I'm going to replace them at that 4 cost and not at some random other cost. The cards that I've found that work to replace Wong are Ghost Rider has some synergy because Ghost Rider works so nicely with Blackcat, your most likely guaranteed discard. So Ghost Rider, Blackcat as a combination can be really powerful. That's 10 power on the board for a cost of 4. So there's some nice energy there. You might also end up pulling Swarm if you play Ghost Rider, or if somehow you get Ghost Rider on turn 6 and you play him, pull out something else crazy. So Ghost Rider is an okay thing to put in here. Another good option could be Absorbing Man. You're rarely going to get Absorbing Man to work on the back of your Colleen Wing, just because you're going to play something on turn 3 most likely. But Absorbing Man can be really nice behind your Jubilee. If you played your Jubilee on turn 4 to try to get Morbius on the board or get M.O.D.O.K on the board, and you didn't get it, then you can play Absorbing Man on turn 5, or same thing with turn 5 and turn 6. You can play Absorbing Man after you played your emergency Jubilee to try to have that extra shot at getting M.O.D.O.K or Morbius on the board. And most of the time, you'll actually succeed at that point because you've now drawn 2 extra cards from that deck pool that you didn't have the chance to draw before. So very valuable there, can be Absorbing Man. I wouldn't play Dracula. That's the one I would actually recommend against, and it's so common in discard decks. And I don't know where Dracula... Oh, I don't have Dracula. I wouldn't play Dracula, and the reason why is Dracula's whole thing is discarding a card at the end of the game. The whole point of this deck is that you usually end the game with no cards in hand. So Dracula, you're not going to get value from. If you don't have Ghost Rider and you don't have Absorbing Man because they are also Series 3 cards, well then, or late series cards, then the best next option is to go for a big points card. So your 3 good big points cards options at that point are going to be Namor, who can challenge a lane all by himself and make things really annoying for your opponent. And if you didn't end up going the swarm direction on the gameplay, Namor can make a given lane more annoying for your opponent. The other one I'd recommend would be Attuma. Attuma, of course, lets you contest for a lane as well by itself. I like Namor better than Attuma, but Attuma can be good here. If you're looking for a low-cost option, you're looking for a really cheapo option to do sort of the same thing, your reliable old girl Jessica Jones, she can give you 8 cost in a lane that can make that lane more contested. You can put her behind Morbius if you feel like you need to contest that lane some more based on how your board is building, or you can give her a lane all to herself to be annoying and to try to contest that lane. So those are your other options in favor of Wong. So those are your two critical cards. Let's talk about the less critical cards. First, Blackcat. Blackcat's not really good in most of the game, so I would not spend any of your credits to get her. But she's really good in this deck for what we talked about before. She's an automatic discard if you don't play her when you get her, which means you get value from her whether you play her or don't, and because you pump that Morbius up. But some options in case you don't have Blackcat. One of them, the most obvious one that people would mostly go to when they're talking about options in favor of Blackcat, is one I really tried for a while, but wouldn't actually recommend, and that's Mystique. Because yes, Mystique, you could play Morbius on turn 2, Mystique on turn 3, and now you have two chances, chances, to buff them up using discards. You could also go Wong and then Mystique, and then double M.O.D.O.K, do a quadruple M.O.D.O.K behind all that. But all of these are chances. They're risky moves. They might not pay off, and I played it with Mystique a lot and just found it wasn't very reliable. Big play possibility, but big fail possibility as well. So when we're talking about replacing Blackcat, my two favorites are actually two very simple options. Two options that you can get because, well, they're readily available for you. One of those two options is going to be Storm. Storm can be nice to play behind your Morbius. You play Morbius on turn 2, then you play Storm on turn 3 to help lock down that lane so they can't contest Morbius very well later in the game, and also so they can't Shang-Chi Morbius later in the game. The only reason why I don't love it is because typically you want your turn 2 play to be Colleen Wing, but if you don't have Colleen Wing, this is a fine thing in your hand to go behind that Morbius and help you lock down that lane and make it so they really can't contest it. The other option is Bishop, which can be really nice, has some good synergy in this deck because of the swarm lanes. In fact, I've won games, and you see one right now, where I didn't even have Morbius on the board, but instead got a bunch of value from dropping a ton of late game swarms so that Bishop got buffed up a whole bunch. Right, so Bishop, another 3-cost curve card you can put in here that is an option in favor of Blackcat. Again, Blackcat's the best because you don't want to play a 3-cost card on turn 3, and you get value from not playing her. But if you do in that situation, playing Blackcat's fine, playing Bishop's fine, and playing Storm. All good 3-cost options. What I would seriously avoid, and this is really critical here, is at that 3-cost, I would avoid the other discard options. I would avoid Moon Knight, I would avoid Swordmaster, because both of them discard randomly. And you don't want to be randomly discarding when you have M.O.D.O.K still potentially in your hand, when you have cards that you need potentially in your hand. So I really don't like Moon Knight or Swordmaster because there's so many times where you won't want to play them because of the risk of discarding M.O.D.O.K. Finally, Lady Sif also, not the greatest card in here because you have so many 6-cost cards. She's not going to target Apocalypse reliably to get him buffed up. And this deck doesn't rely on discarding and then calling back with things like Ghost Rider or things like Hela, things like that. So she's actually not a really reliable option for this version of a discard deck. Finally, let's talk about your 6-cost cards, Arnim, Zola, and Helicarrier for replacing those two. The reality is that they're both not critically important for the deck. Helicarrier in this variation with Wong is maybe more important than Arnim Zola. They're both fairly easily replaceable. The most obvious and easy one you can do is throw in Hela, because Hela, again, these are cards to be discarded more often than not. So replacing Arnim Zola or Helicarrier with Hela, great. She'll be discarded just like them. You do lose the 4 discards with Helicarrier if you don't have it versus 1. But Hela could still be a great, hey, I drew her on turn 6, and I can play her to get a bunch of cards on the board, awesome. Or a Jubilee, like you play Jubilee, and then you get the discards back, some discards on the board because of that as well. So Hela can be a good option, can be a fine option, just not the reliance on this version of a M.O.D.O.K discard deck. Another one that is a nice low-cost option, because you have access to it, is Spectrum. Spectrum, again, you're mostly going to discard, but in the event that you Jubilee her on the board or that you draw her on turn 6 and play her when you didn't have Apocalypse, cool. Throw her on there and give +2 more power to your Morbius, give +2 more power to your Wong, 5 power as well. Not a bad one if you're looking for a free-to-play option. Another free-to-play option here, Hulk. Totally fine as a free-to-play option. Get him in there. Again, these cards are mostly going to be discarded rather than used, so this is also a fine one as a free-to-play player. Go ahead and free-to-play your way on with Hulk. I wouldn't play America Chavez specifically Why? Well, because a lot of the times in this deck, you're trying to miracle draw Morbius or M.O.D.O.K, and particularly M.O.D.O.K on turn 6, if you haven't done it already. Having America Chavez as a guaranteed turn 6 draw, if you haven't drawn her yet, lessens your chances of getting the cards this deck relies on. So I would not pick America Chavez. That's it for my guide on the Momo combo. I hope that you enjoyed it. I'm really enjoying doing these deck breakdowns, and this is a really fun deck to play. So it's such an interesting ability for M.O.D.O.K, but how do you make use of it? I think this is a great one for the mid-ladder, for those climbers who aren't quite pushing infinite yet, but trying to break through those middle ranks. I had fun doing it with this deck. Hopefully you do as well. That's it. If you haven't yet, subscribe to this channel, like this video, leave a comment below on what kind of deck you want to see me break down next time, and I'll see you right back here next time on Slate and Mobile Gaming.